Simon and your modern-day roadshow team. I never thought of you like that. But now I'm looking at you, I'm thinking, yes, yeah, I can see
Going
that.
for that look.
As it's all been about 50 years of Radio 1 and 2 this weekend, I've been reminded of the events that took place when the Radio 1 Roadshow visited Porthcawl in 1983, when I was just a lad of 14. Porthcawl nowadays is on the map for the annual Elvis Festival, the tarmac beach and the seafront being photographed on stormy, windy days when the waves cascade into and then over the breakwater. Now, back in the 80s, we had the fairground, the same stormy sea, obviously, and the Stoneleigh and Apollo nightclubs to look forward to visiting when you were 18 and only 18.
Obviously, yeah.
It was a quiet town, especially during the winter, but filled up with holidaymakers from the South Wales valleys in the summer. So you can imagine how popular the annual summer visit of the roadshow was. It didn't matter which DJ was on the... Oh, thanks a lot. Was on the stage. Thousands and thousands turned up every year just to be a part of this. And on Vintage, actually, there is a special hour of roadshow stuff.
Fun starts at 10, we're live at 11.
Always.
Yeah.
Anyway, the last week of the summer term in 1983 saw Bugsy, Dino and me deciding to mitch off school and go to the roadshow. I imagine that's the same as skiving.
Yes, we don't condone, obviously.
Obviously don't. No, you have to stay at school. Don't go to the... Well, no, don't.
No.
That was being held in the fireworks display arena at the back of the fair. The main entrance to the fair was still locked at 9 a.m. and crowds were gathering because, as you know, the fun started at 10.
Yep.
So we decided to jump the queue by going in through a small side entrance opposite the Dinosaur Safari Park on Mackworth Road. You hadn't mentioned the Dinosaur Safari Park. That would be there all year. That would be an attraction, wouldn't it? You could go to that. The side entrance, wouldn't you? The side entrance, I would.
Yes.
Bring all the family. Fun for all ages.
Anyway.
The side entrance was open, so we ran in, and with no security in sight, we went straight to the barrier at the front, 10 yards from the mobile stage. It was brilliant. Obviously, we don't condone that.
No.
Either, because the security is there for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some people would have queued all morning, so that's
Quite a lot
fair,
we don't
is it?
condone in this
Anyway,
one.
you're already in trouble, Mike. That's clearly the case. A few minutes later, the main gates must have been open as we could hear a stampede of people running through the fairground. As they sprinted past the arcades, the waltzers and funhouse towards the arena, we could see they looked really annoyed that us local urchins had beaten them to the front. Ha-ha. Then the warm-up entertainment started with Smiley Miley, who then asked for volunteers for the two regular games, Bits and Pieces and the mileage game. Yes. I stuck my hand up. Could not believe it. He picked me for the mileage game. I climbed over the barrier and got up on the stage, where the other three contestants, all older than me, were already sitting down. I then introduced myself to the sea of people, whose numbers included a fair number of my schoolmates, also skiving off.
Okay.
There's a lot of skiving going on in Porthcawl at the moment. Anyway, I can imagine he was just going to his mates.
Yeah.
And about this time, the production crew were thinking we picked the wrong one there. Now, Father Sam and I knew the roadshow had been in Barry the day before, so I was thinking the answer to the mileage game, the distance between yesterday's and today's venue, would be about 20 miles. See? Local knowledge. And as I sat there waiting for the game to begin, I noticed a production member of staff with a clipboard under their arm, and with a bit of squinting, I could see the following written in large letters. Mileage, 8,496 miles. Written on it. 8,496? This clearly wasn't going to be today's answer, so I thought nothing of it until the game started. And Smiley Miley asked us, in turn, the distance from Barry to Porthcawl via New Delhi.
Oh, yeah.
This was clearly a ludicrous trick played by a member of the media elite on the poor...
Of course.
On the poor Welsh workers who had taken time out to watch a DJ put some records on in a field. Right. Why would anyone go from Barry to Porthcawl via New Delhi? The whole idea was utterly preposterous. Anyway, I was third in line and I actually knew the answer. Yes, I knew the answer. What should I do? Because I'm an honest lad, but on the other hand, there's a Radio 1 goodie bag at stake. So I swallowed hard, shrugged off my own disdain and sold my soul for a Radio 1 pen and bug, which stuck on your chest. I said, hang on, Barry, maybe Paris, maybe like Munich, Belgrade. Have to hurry you, says Smiley. Would it be about 8? No, 8. Hurry up. Got a show. 8,000. I don't know, 8,500. I grinned impishly at the rather strange Mr. Miley. Just 4 out, says Mr. Miley. What a strange and clever person you are. Well done. Here's a Radio 1 goodie bag. But obviously, I got BBC stuff by cheating, and I broke in the first place. So anyway, I don't ask forgiveness from my friends and family for cheating, not from the thousands in the arena who we beat to the front using illegal means. And actually, I seek forgiveness from the other 3 volunteers, although now I come to think about it, they should have opened their eyes, and they were between them 4, 6 and 3,000 miles out. Losers. So Mike wants, I don't know if I don't think he wants forgiveness at all, actually, but that's his crime. Breaks in, well, first of all, Skype's off school, breaks into the Radio 1 Roadshow, and then steals the information, uses it to win a Radio 1 pen and a chest bug. What do you say, Sister Bobby?
Oh, it's tricky. So the first counts of skiving off school. It's really tricky, isn't it? Because, you know, it's a kind of one-off event that Radio 1 comes to your town and brings a band and brings everybody. And it's brilliant. So why shouldn't... I think the school should really let you give you time off. I think it should be a school trip out. So I think, actually, that's the school's fault. They encourage that.
It's the school's
so
fault.
on that
Quite
count,
right.
it's the school's
Yes.
fault. But only on that count.
You've
Secondly,
changed.
for sneaking in... Well, the thing is, it's a Radio 1 roadshow. They were just brilliant. Western Supermares, we live for them. I'm just going to bring it down to the mileage game. I think for that, I cannot forgive you, because that was straightforward cheating. Although, I have to say, the mileage game always confused me, because I remember we did research in our family, like the Western Supermare one, and we were spot on, and we were still out, and we thought, there's something going on here. There's something not straight about the mileage. Yeah, because I think so. I don't forgive you,
Did you
Mike.
do it via New Delhi?
No, we didn't.
That's where we went wrong.
But we had a proper instrument that measured it. So I think the Smiley Miley was not... not basically,
It wasn't basically what?
I don't know. I just think, he was pulling all
It's a
sorts of tricks.
conspiracy
Well,
theory.
yeah, I have to be careful what I say, allegedly. Anyway, you're not forgiven, Mike, for cheating about the mileage
Brother
game.
Matthew.
Okay, so here's my view on cheating. If the people who are running the quiz have the answer readily available, then it's not really cheating. If all you have to do is look at someone's clipboard and squint your eyes, it's not really cheating. And which of us here would say that we wouldn't have done the same? None of us. We'd have all done this. We'd have all gone, not sure, 8,500 probably. So somewhere 4 miles short of that probably, I think. So I am definitely going to forgive, because I think we'd have all done it. And well done for winning a BBC competition, because that didn't happen again for a while. So I am going to say yes, forgiven.
Dear Simon and the All Forgiving Collective, especially Matt, this comes from Dan, by the way. Thank you, Dan. After 20 years, it seems right to let go the burden of my guilt and throw myself at the mercy of your judgment. It was a recent confession I heard on your show, something to do with a music publication, which triggered my memory and brought back an overwhelming sensation of guilt and dishonesty. Now, as a fully grown adult and responsible parent, trying my hardest to instill good morals and virtues in my children, I need to clear my own slate in order that I, too, might be a good role model. My story dates back to late 1995 or possibly early 1996. I am 18. I am a first-year student at the University of Loughborough and a bit of a rocker. My days generally consisted of getting up for breakfast at lunchtime, not doing enough study, too much watching of Beavis and Butthead, and then thrashing out with some loud metal on my hi-fi. That's what I was doing all day. That's what we did in Loughborough. My room in Halls, however, was incredible. A mixture of scantily clad pictures of Pamela Anderson and Joe Guest, and torn-out posters from Metal Hammer and Kerrang magazines. Now, I'm familiar with Kerrang. Do you subscribe to Metal Hammer?
Metal Hammer, yes, absolutely.
What kind of thing?
Those are 2 very good publications.
High-quality publications, very good. I guess, looking back, I was a good balance, says Dan, of popular and unpopular, and it was Kerrang magazine which was at the centre of my deception. At this time, they ran a regular competition called Face in the Crowd, where they would show a picture of some sweaty headbangers at a recent gig with a circle around someone's face. And that was, obviously, the face in the crowd. Then, if that person happened to be a reader, all they had to do was to send a photograph of themselves to win by post. Email was in its infancy back then, and digital photographs were the stuff of tomorrow's world. Yes.
That's a really good feature.
Well, absolutely. One particular issue of Kerrang, the face in the crowd individual, looked rather familiar. It was me. The only thing was, this picture was taken at a lawnmower death concert.
What a name!
What?
Oh, yes!
And how do you think you spell death, by the way? Go on then.
Well, not D-E-E-A-S?
No.
A-F?
AF? No, it's obviously lawnmower death is spelled D-E-T-H. There's no A.
There's
Is
no
there
A.
an umlaut?
There's no umlauts anywhere.
Definitely
but what
not
a band.
misspelt. No.
Anyway, it's Lawnmower Death, who I think come from the Nottinghamshire area. I don't know where it was. I wasn't there, to be honest, says Dan. Lawnmower Death was a bit beyond my taste. My taste was predominantly the big four, and that shouldn't need explaining, but Matt will explain anyway.
Slayer, Metallica, Anthrax, and Megadeth.
But it looked as though I was at a Lawnmower Death concert. By the way, in case you're interested, have we found them? Yes, we have. Here we go with some Lawnmower Death.
Hang on, that's a cover.
They're doing Kids in America.
Yeah. Hey!
For the first time on Radio
I think they're
2.
doing the backing vocals as well.
Anyway. So it's the mid-90s, and that was the face in the crowd at the Lawnmower Death concert, and it was clearly Dan, except that he wasn't actually there. That was not his kind of thing at all. I definitely wasn't there, says Dan. Well, I thought, if I think this guy could be me, then surely those at Kerrang will be convinced as well. So I scrounged around for a stamp, and I duly sent them a photograph of myself to Kerrang HQ. Some time passed, perhaps a few weeks, enough time for life to move on, and I forgot all about the competition. Then one day, a fellow student said there was a package that had arrived for me at the Students' Union. It was a massive cardboard box, the sort of thing you might use to move house, and it was absolutely stuffed full of goodies. It was a rock hamper.
Wow.
Now that is that's a good marketing. I've just had an idea.
Yeah.
Rock hampers.
Yes.
Do you think? And you could just fill it full of rock.
Rock.
Pass that on to Dr. Bosch.
What, for a hod carrier?
Yeah, very good. I'm not quite sure what the success rate of this competition was in terms of actually finding the face in the crowd. I'm guessing it was not that great because I had everything in this box. It was crammed full. I had 10 T-shirts, a dozen or so CDs, and a range of General Tap posters and merchandise, a lot of it with Lawnmower Death on. What a complete result. So 20 years have now passed and the T-shirts don't fit anymore, and it's becoming even harder to find something on which to play the CDs. So it's time to come clean. I don't feel the need to ask forgiveness from Kerrang. I followed their rules, and it was they who agreed that I looked most like the guy in the photograph. But to this day I have wondered if that Lawnmower Death fan had also entered the competition and that I was unjustly judged to be more of a likeness than he was to himself. So it's on his behalf that I ask you to grant me some forgiveness. Well, very good. Okay, I don't think there are phone calls being made even now to the assorted members of Lawnmower Death. I think we were just on radio. Get away! We're not going to be on Radio 2.
Radio 2.
They have
Yes,
moved
we
on.
were.
Anyway, so Sister Rebecca, what do you make of Dan's confession?
Well, the thing is, if he thought it was him, then he's right in guessing that the people at Kerrang would never have known that it wasn't him. But I guess the whole point is, as he said, that there may have been a genuine person who lost out as a result. But, you know, I doubt it very much, somehow. So I think, I don't think anyone else missed out. I do think he has already suffered, because, as he said, he didn't even like Lawnmower Death, and he got the T-shirt, so what was the point of that? So I'm going to forgive, because it's funny.
Bobby will find a moral position to take.
Well, no, I think that Kerrang are the forerunners of upcycling. What they did is they were cleaning out the cupboard and they went, how can we get rid of this but not throw it in to a dump or put it into landfill? So what we need to do is, no one is really going to claim to be in the crowd of this crowd and this band, but let's just put it out there for a joke, and it's like a rock find Wally, of course, and there was probably one person, just Dan, that sent his picture in and just went, yeah, that's me, and they went, that's fine, let's send him the stuff. He's the guy that claimed it. It's absolutely fine, and you're forgiven. You are forgiven.
By the way, Lawnmower Death are on at Rock City, which is in, I imagine this is in Nottingham, on the 19th of
still
December.
Going.
Yeah, they're still going. And, says Neil in St Helens, if I recall, their lead singer is called Qualcast Rotivator. They really are hot on the lawnmower thing.
Wow.
Okay, thank you, Neil. So, Brother Matt, what do you make
Yeah, well,
of that?
I mean, obviously we should, first of all, stand and applaud the choice of title of band, Lawnmower Death. Who doesn't want to spend an evening with Lawnmower Death? No one. And, but also, Bobby's quite right. Basically, all of this stuff was coming from the pluggers for Lawnmower Death, who had been flooding Kerrang offices with their T-shirts and posters and CDs. And so they were very happy to get it off their hands. So, frankly, Dan, well done, you know, because the pluggers for Lawnmower Death couldn't really get rid of that stuff quick enough. And what great news to hear that the band are back together and now touring the country.
This is the place where penitents seek our pardon for their sins. Simon Mayo's Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon and the Radio 2 Festive Synod. I haven't told anyone of the incident I'm about to confess to, and even now, some 43 years later, I feel uneasy in relating this shameful episode to you. So we're really going back here. In the 1970s, I lived in a Derbyshire coal mining village, different times, which was surrounded by some beautiful countryside. Stereotypically, in a mining community, my family owned pigeons, ferrets, and a menagerie of other animals, including 3 whippets, but we had no flat caps. In order to exercise said whippets, my brother and I would walk them down the country lane opposite to where we lived, and one of us would hold them at the edge of a field whilst the other stood a few hundred metres away, shaking a piece of fake fur for the whippets to race towards. This we repeated a few times, allowing them to display their natural instincts to chase after anything that was small and furry. The incident for which I am seeking your forgiveness took place in the week leading up to Christmas in 1974. It occurred one evening as I was returning from a long walk with the dogs, and I was within sight of my home, the house lights shining in the darkness. It was a very rural area, virtually no traffic, all was very quiet. Then I began to hear a noise. It was the faint sound of music playing in the distance. I stood for a while as the music gradually grew louder and louder until I realised where it was coming from. I looked into the distance towards the entrance of the lane, and I saw the brightly lit lorry dray belonging to the local round table, decked with fake snow, a couple of elves, and Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus, dressed in their long red cloaks, playing I Wish It Would Be Christmas Every Day on their record deck. Oh, what a lovely treat for the kiddies, I thought, looking on. Bobby has a beautiful smile on.
Lovely, wistful thoughts.
Yes, I think she knows where we're going here. It's at this point I would like to appeal to your sense of understanding, Father Simon, and perhaps you'll appreciate that I couldn't have possibly foreseen that just at the point when I was about to secure the whippets to their leads, the lorry stopped for Mr. and Mrs. Santa to wave to the excited children in their homes, when a gust of wind picked up seemingly from nowhere and blew the hem of Mr. Santa's long fur-trimmed cloak over the edge of the lorry. My heart missed more than a few beats, even now as I write this, as I recall the vision of my 3 whippets, clearly thinking, rabbits! Tearing up the lane at a pace that Usain Bolt would have struggled to match, launching themselves at the white fur trim on Santa's cape that was billowing enticingly for them. What fun they seemed to be having as my shouted pleas for them to let go of Santa were drowned out by Roy Wood. The whippets set about Santa as... It's not a line I've actually ever said before. As Mrs. Santa held on to her husband as though Christmas itself depended on it. Santa then inadvertently kicked over the record player as he lost his balance and clung on to his robes as the whippets ripped away at the fur trim. I started to sprint the 50 metres or so up the lane to retrieve the whippets when I saw them running back towards me, the hem of Santa's robe in their mouths. I stopped running and stood transfixed in the darkness. An attack on Santa seemed an unforgivable sin. Surely I would be presentless forever. Well, I'm relieved to report that Santa regained his balance and his composure, that one of the elves managed to find Mrs. Santa's hat, a little bit of saliva on it, and one of her boots amongst the fake snow, and the record deck was soon playing out the cheery Christmas tunes once more, so no harm was done. I told myself unconvincingly, apart from Father Christmas' tattered and battered hemline, now a few inches shorter than tradition dictates. But it's not too racy, really. Later in the evening, my dad returned from the pub where news of Santa's troubles had been regaled with much jollity by the parents who'd seen it with their kids. It appears that as the dogs were on the darker side of the dray, they hadn't been seen by anyone properly. Therefore, no one could point the finger at me. Father Simon, I seek forgiveness for not admitting to all concerned the real reason for Mr. and Mrs. Santa appearing to have a domestic on the back of the dray, and for probably giving the young kiddies nightmares after they saw Santa grappling with his missus and the dogs and then falling off the sleigh. Chaotic scenes indeed in Derbyshire. Despite it being 43 years ago, I still feel a sense of shame when this time of year comes around. May I have your forgiveness, please? What a scene down the lanes in Derbyshire, in the mining village, as the Whippets set about Santa. I imagine that we're talking about fake fur, but it's the 70s, so who knows? But let's assume that it's fake fur, otherwise it all gets way too... just very, very complicated. Faux fur guaranteed.
Yeah.
No one had... No, I don't think that. Anyway, let's just assume that that's right. Yeah, what do you think then, Sister Bobby?
Well, full marks for Santa and Mrs. Santa going out with a record player as well, you know, on vinyl. Roy Wood, how fantastic.
I know, imagine...
Over the
being
bumps.
on a lorry playing records, how's that going to work
That's fantastic. Anyway, so I love that. The thing is, of course, you should always keep your animals under control, but it's a kind of rural environment. There's no kind of real risk there, is there? So I can understand why you were just, you know, leisurely walking along. I love this. I thought it was absolutely hilarious, and luckily no one was really harmed. So I'm going to say I'm actually full of festive spirit, Keith, tonight.
Is that right?
And it was 1974.
Yes.
And the dogs had fun and no real harm done. So you are forgiven.
OK, Novice, what do you make of that then?
Well, here you go. Wizard on vinyl, hurrah. But I'm not going to forgive you, Keith, and I'll tell you why. OK? 2 reasons. Whippets, the beasts were not under control at all. So it could have been a small dog, for instance. That's quite furry. They could easily have gone for that. A cat. Did they go for those as well? They should have been on leads. They weren't. They raced off. They could have... I mean, we could have traumatised poor old... Father Christmas. And that's the real reason I'm not forgiving you, Keith. It's because it's not Santa Claus. Santa Claus is some American import. It's Father Christmas.
Oh,
Father
please.
and Mrs. Christmas. Absolutely. It is. It's always been Father Christmas. Always will. And originally in a green coat. Never mind a red one. We know where that one came from. Overseas. So, Keith, definitely not forgiven.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Superb. Well done,
Thank you,
Nigel.
Mark.
Quite right, too.
Yeah.
If you go to White Hart Lane at Christmas, you'll find that Santa wears blue and white. So
Well, that's okay. I'm happy with that.
I suspect the same is true at Everton.
Some fizzy drink.
Yes.
Anyway,
so,
Matthew.
well, Whippet's going for Santa. I mean, really, this is nature running its course, isn't it? This is very much the circle of life.
Take him down!
Yes, absolutely. Off you go. Very much as they were brought up in the fields, the Whippets learned to take down Santa. So, this is very, very, very much responding to the primeval urges through the centuries. So, let's say... forgiven because it's Christmas, so yes, I'm going to forgive because the dogs just do what dogs do.
All right, so
bring down Santa.
Dear Simon, when I was 18, I am 65 now, I worked underground in a Cornish tin mine. It was 2,160 feet straight down, and at this depth underground, heat and humidity are very, very high. And on this particular day, I was set to work on what was called the Grizzly. A lot of reclaimed rails from British Rail, which together formed a criss-cross section over a sheer drop to the next level, and the crusher. My job as the Grizzly Man, as I was known, was to break up some rocks, some of which weighed over a ton each, and send them on their way down using a hefty 12 or 16 pound sledgehammer. The problem was some of these rocks were so hard, the sledge would just bounce off them and dynamite had to be used to break them up. So here I was, breaking rocks, hungover from the night before because of a birthday party, suitably dressed for the job in hand, stark naked except for a helmet, battery belt and boots due to the sheer heat, and swearing a lot because I didn't seem to be able to break this one particular rock. And to make matters worse, the shift boss was nowhere to be found and I needed him to blast the rock with dynamite. I then heard the cage, that's one of those large metal lifts, arrive at our level, and indistinct voices coming towards me. I continued swinging the sledgehammer and swearing every time the hammer just bounced from the rock, with an end result of just a few chips and dust for my efforts. My back was turned towards the people arriving, but I assumed one of them was my shift boss, who had finally come down to help me. As I turned to ask for explosives, and let me remind you of my demeanour here, I was naked and filthy from sweat and dirt, I was greeted with the unforgettable words, "And this, Your Highness..." "And this, Your Highness, is the grizzly." Yes, Simon, unbeknownst to me, this VIP visitor was being shown round the mine. He was a young man back then, but you should know his son is now to be married in Westminster Abbey later this year. Well, he was the Duke of Cornwall. That's one of his gigs. Just in case you needed a hint as to who we're talking about here. And there he was with his team and the top brass from the mine management, and me, completely starkers and very grubby. If you're going to meet royalty, that's like the worst. What's the worst place you can meet them? Time stood still, Simon, and in that frozen moment all I could see was the glaring brightness from the special lights that they were using for the visit, and lots of men in white boiler suits, but the laughter was infectious, and I just had to join in. The party then went on their way, and I went back to breaking rocks and naturally took a lot of stick in the showers later, but all in all the hangover was declared completely cured. So I now seek forgiveness from the entire Windsor family and other members of the royal household and its staff who had the pleasure of meeting me that fine day. I especially need to beg for pardon from His Royal Highness himself, and I hope that the sight of a stinky, foul-mouthed Cornishman in his birthday suit hasn't traumatised our future king too much. What a tale. In fact, it does make me think miners. Must be some mining confessions. It's certainly our first royal confession. In fact, there might be some royal confessions. I'm not sure whether we'll get away with them. This one was fine. Jack, thank you very much indeed for your tale. Let's see how forgiving
Is
our
it normal
collective
to
is.
be mining while stark naked? Presumably, it is normal.
Well, I think to be stark naked while mining, well, I would imagine if you're 2,000 feet down and your job is to smash up rocks, presumably that is a fairly...
Well, you see, I feel sorry for Jack because I think, you know, he wasn't warned. Presumably they knew there was a member of the royal family
Exactly right.
coming down the mine. It's
Don't
kind
tell
of
the grizzly.
unusual. Yeah, exactly. Let's keep it a secret. Hopefully he was so dirty that it would have slightly covered up, you know, most of it. I don't think it was Jack's fault at all. I think he should have been told and he could have put something on. So he's completely forgiven.
Completely forgiven, yes. Okay, Mother Superior.
Don't you think it's rather dangerous to be doing that particular job with a large sledgehammer
Well, you would think that the rocks
with
could fly
nothing
off.
to protect your bits? I would have thought that would have been a very dangerous thing to have done.
Yes.
Health and safety would not be happy with that, I don't think.
Couldn't do that at the BBC, could you?
What? What, walk around naked, covered in mud?
Smash up rocks.
Oh, I see.
Whilst naked.
Bruce Parry could get a TV series out of it, probably. But
I do
anyway.
hope everything is intact, Jack. Really.
Breaking
yes.
rocks, that's what he does.
I think the royal family, and in particular Prince Charles, have a great sense of humour, and they would have found it incredibly, rollickingly funny. So I think that as far as I'm concerned, Jack, you are totally forgiven for giving everyone a good laugh.
Okay, Brother Matt goes next.
It was superb. I love that. I was trying to think what the worst possible thing could be behind him as you were telling that story, and the words, "and this, Your Royal Highness, is the grizzly."
Because everyone's thinking, what do you say if you meet Prince Charles or the Queen or the Duke of Edinburgh? We go, well, if you're naked, that's...
If you're naked
that's
with
a
your
good
hands around the
conversation
grizzly.
starter.
Yes. And what do you do? Have you come far?
Yes.
Indeed I have. You're definitely forgiven, Jack. Well done.
Father Simon and his sometimes churlish comrades of the confessional. Yeah. It would have been 1973 when this awful event in my life occurred, and like many boys of the early 70s, when I wasn't trying to look cool in my Oxford bags, big collared shirts and tank tops, I did what most teenage boys did in the privacy of their own bedrooms. I played Subbuteo, the game of choice for the discerning young football fan.
Yes, it is.
Unlike many of my friends, I didn't have the flash box-packaged edition of the Bays pitch, but I did have goalposts and nets supplied with the standard blue and red shirted teams. But not being a particular fan of either Everton or Manchester United, I wanted teams I could relate to. Thus, my 22 tiny men obviously became Walsall and Brazil. I was actually a West Bromwich Albion fan, but we all know they don't play in red, so Walsall was the nearest team I could think of who wore that colour, all right? The green baize pitch was pinned to a thin piece of hardboard and kept under my bed, and the additional extras I had bought included a plastic picket-style fence to surround the pitch and a brown plastic scoreboard with slots in to hold the relevant team names, helping to complete the theatre of dreams of its day. Very often I would just stick Team Walsall or Team Brazil in my pocket after school and wander round to a friend's house for a match. But as my regular opponent Steve was out on the day in question, I was stuck with playing with my little brother, my horribly talented little brother, who should thus be referred to as A, the letter A, capital A. The match in question against A was played on a Sunday afternoon following Star Soccer with Hugh Johns on ITV. People nodding at this point. I remember that. And it was agreed that was just in the Midlands, so it was just shown there. That's where it was. And it was agreed that the game would comprise of 2 10-minute halves and a 2-minute half-time break. The pitchboard was pulled out from under the bed and carried downstairs. And for teams I chose Walsall, my brother therefore by default Brazil, and the players were set up for kick-off. We wrote out the team sheets, and as I had been up the Albion that day to see them play out an entertaining draw with Coventry, I drafted the legendary West Brom midfielder Tony Bomber Brown into my starting 11. Because I could. It was my game after all. Similarly, Brother A submitted his Brazil team with a surprise selection of Alan Ball alongside Carlos Alberto in midfield. Ask your dad. Brazil took an early lead through the aforementioned Alan Ball, quickly followed by a second, third and fourth goal. It remained 4-0 to Brazil at half-time, the brown plastic scoreboard confirming my inferiority. It seemed my brother could get his players to respond in a way that I could only dream of, and another 10 minutes of this, and it was going to be a massive and damaging defeat. My bro left the room in the 2-minute break to rehydrate with orange squash. And it was then that the the disaster happened. Our lovely, gentle giant of a golden retriever, please call him Fido to protect his real identity, had awoken from his slumber and lolloped into the room towards me. He flopped over onto the hallowed turf, rolling onto his back, tail swishing with his legs in the air, as if to say, tickle my tummy. His face looked like he was grinning, but he was blissfully aware that probably unaware, that he'd inadvertently maimed several of the Brazilian team. Lying there separated from their bases and helpless, Carlos Alberto, Rivellino, Giazino, Pele and Alan Ball.
All of them.
All injured. My brother had sauntered back into the room ready to apply the coup de grace to me and my Walsall All-Stars team. Couldn't believe his eyes at the carnage before him. Oh no, I said. Fido, he's killed Brazil. I couldn't stop him. He just walked over and he collapsed on the pitch. There was nothing I could do. Little brother gave Fido a disbelieving look bordering on a scowl and banished him back to his giant dog bed under the kitchen table, and the game was subsequently abandoned at 0-4. And as you know, Father Simon, all abandoned football matches are declared void and struck from the records. Therefore, I hadn't actually lost. You could actually say that I was the winner, especially as I would never play my brother again at Subbuteo after that fateful day. Now, I don't seek forgiveness from my brother, as several years later he clipped my pride and joy modded up Vespa on our parents' drive with his pimped-up Peugeot 205, causing damage he couldn't afford to pay for. I do, however, seek forgiveness from our dear trusty old dog Fido, because I must now finally confess that he was not, in fact, to blame. Instead, it was I, in a fit of temper, who had crushed Brazil's star players with my fist and summoned the dog over to lie on the pitch to cover up my vandalism. I wanted it to appear that he who caused the carnage, it was he who caused the carnage, thus depriving my brother of a massive victory, and even worse, bragging and gloating rights. Anyway, as it was my game, and as it was me who was out of pocket through having to buy a new Subbuteo team, I have probably been punished enough, and surely a lifetime of being an Albion fan is penance itself. Little brother went on to much better things. He now lives in southwest London and has a lovely golden retriever, so he's obviously forgiven the breed, even though poor Fido was never, ever the culprit. But he was very useful. He happened to be there, and he covered my rage, my anti-Brazilian rage. What do you say, Sister Bobby?
No, you can't be forgiven. You're like an older sibling that always thinks they should win because they're older and they're better than their younger ones, and you can't cope with it. So no, and you can't blame the dog for everything. The dog gets blamed.
He had anger issues, didn't he, Jay?
Well, it's one of those things about entitlement. Because you're the oldest, you don't get everything. So Jay, it's very simple. You are not forgiven.
I would like to see Walsall play Brazil.
Yes,
anyway,
I think we all
Brother
would.
Matthew.
Well, speaking as the elder of the siblings, it is the natural order of things that we should be winning at everything. And if we are not winning, then obviously something has gone wrong and it's important to reset the order. And if that means we have to, kill Brazil with the dog and then blame it on the dog, then that's what's going to happen. I mean, my guess is that A has always secretly suspected that it wasn't Fido and it was in fact his elder brother, but because A didn't stand up to his older brother, this is what happens. So I am definitely going to forgive, because looks like younger sibling knew exactly what was going on but didn't have the backbone to stand up.
Dear Father Simon and the Ever Merciful Collective, says Brastoff, I wish to seek forgiveness for a deed perpetrated some 40 years ago,
Wow.
which took place on a North Gwent orchestra course held in a local comprehensive school. As we all know, an orchestra is divided into several sections, and I was a member of the brass section. I should point out for the uninitiated that the brass band environment is very competitive, and it's not a genre open to any other of the orchestra sections apart from percussion. Therefore, we considered ourselves a little bit above the penny whistlers, the woodwind,
Well, you would.
and certainly above the bow scrapers, strings. Who needs them? They, on the other hand, considered the rather loutish brass section as nothing other than a bunch of knuckle draggers. How very dare they? The conductor of the orchestra, Mr. Jones we should call him, was on the side of the enemy, as he was that most abhorrent of things, a woodwind teacher. Who knew? There are
This is great. I love this.
so much tribalism in
yeah.
this particular
Brilliant.
story. It's amazing an orchestra can hang together at all, isn't it, really, when they all hate each other so much. One Saturday at the end of the autumn term, we all broke for lunch as usual, and we knuckle draggers had decided that we would head to the high street, as we usually did. During our wanderings, we passed a fishmonger's, and with no particular plan in mind, we cobbled together some money. We bought 2 rather large trout. Then, on our way back to the school, we hatched a plan. We would split into 2 divisions, the trumpets and the trombones, each with its own mission, and each with its own fish. As we entered the school, most people were heading back to the main hall to recommence the rehearsal. With no one around us trumpet players, armed with trout number 1, we headed to the girls' toilets, a place of great mystery to a bunch of teenage boys. We entered, and I placed the fish carefully into cubicle number 1's toilet bowl, head facing up, as if it had just swum up the toilet. Its eyes stared wildly at the ceiling, and its mouth was wide open. Okay. We giggled like a bunch of 8-year-olds and scarpered, ensuring no one saw us. We then headed to join the others in the hall. Afternoon break arrived, and we quickly gathered in the corridor where both sets of toilets were located. We hung around the boys' side and waited to see what would happen. Before long, the youngest member of the orchestra, who happened to be an oboe player, entered the girls' toilets. We held our breath, but we didn't have to hold it for long. There was an almighty scream, and this girl ran out of the toilet wailing, "There's a fish! There's a fish in the toilet!" Her fellow woodwinders all gathered round. She sobbed slightly, and a female tutor was hurriedly fetched. At that point, we thought we'd better make ourselves scarce, and so we cleared off. When the orchestra had gathered and seated, none of the tutors could at first be seen. Then the middle door opened, and they all entered, trailing in one behind the other. Last one in, Mr. Jones. However, he was not alone. He was accompanied by trout number 1, which he had skewered with his baton and was carrying it upright into the hall. We in the brass section had never come closer to wetting ourselves than this moment. It was agonizing. Mr. Jones spoke briefly, and though it was some time ago, I can remember the short speech delivered whilst he stared fixedly at the brass section. "We have found a fish."
Really?
As they speak like this in North Gwent, okay?
Yes.
"We have found a fish in the girls' toilets. Just because it was in the girls' toilets, none of us are fooled that it was actually put there by a girl." He then flung trout number 1 in the general area of the brass section. Wasn't a bad shot, just flying over the head of the first trombone player and landing with a squelch. Most people laughed, with the exception of some of the woodwind, and in particular the oboe player. Wiping the baton down, Mr. Jones calmly uttered the immortal words, "From the Allegro, please." Now, as mentioned earlier, there were actually 2 fish. What Mr. Jones didn't know was that trout number 1 was a mere diversionary tactic. During the afternoon break, the trombonists had been busy. With, I suspect, the help of a coarse tutor, who to this day has remained nameless, they had managed to appropriate Mr. Jones's car keys from the staff room. Popping the bonnet, they had expertly wedged Trout number 2 between the car frame and the radiator, then quickly closed the bonnet and replaced the keys. Now, Mr. Jones often gave some of his woodwind pupils a lift home, so our thoughts were that on a cold evening they would all be treated to a fishy-smelling homeward journey. This part of the prank, however, didn't go to plan. Unbeknownst to us, Mr. Jones went straight home that night with no extra passengers, and as he didn't have to travel that far, there was no chance for Trout number 2 to do its work. What happened next was actually relayed to us by our own brass tutor, suspect number 1 in the tutor assistant scandal, I might say. It transpires that Trout number 2 had an unpredicted, rather cold overnight stop in Mr. Jones's car. However, the following morning, Mr. Jones was scheduled to take his mother-in-law to church.
Of course.
Which wasn't just down the road,
No,
but indeed some miles away.
Yeah.
Long enough, as it happened, for Trout number 2 to fulfil its potential. So if you can picture the scene, on a cold December Sunday morning, heater on full, Mr. Jones, wife and mother-in-law in tow, headed off. All the while, Trout number 2 was nicely frying on the radiator. Apparently after 4 miles, the smell had become unbearable, with smoke billowing from the bonnet. Mr. Jones got out of the car, opened the bonnet, only to find Trout number 2 partly fried and partly frozen, lying across his radiator. His wife and mother-in-law had exited the car by then also. They never made it to church, but turned around and headed home, with windows wide open, freezing as they went. All their clothes eventually had to be binned, as apparently nothing could get rid of the wretched fish smell. So anyway, Father Simon, I seek forgiveness not from the oboe player who was so shaken up by the unexpected appearance of a fish in the toilet bowl. She was young, she had years to get over it. And she played an oboe. Not from Mr. Jones, who perpetuated the continued development of woodwind players for years to come, but from his wife and mother-in-law, who were unintended victims of Trout number 2, who ended up smelling of fish and never made it to church. Brassed off. So many undercurrents of rivalry and hatred, all in one orchestra. North Gwent is clearly a hotbed for this kind of thing. What do you say, Sister Bobby?
Well, it's tricky because there were some innocent victims, right? Mrs. Jones and mother-in-law. They didn't really deserve to be stunk out quite like that, did they? But it wasn't your intention. You had other intentions which should have worked. I don't think actually this is too malicious. I think it actually is great fun. I wouldn't have done this, but I would have laughed at this. So I think actually in this time I will generally forgive you, except for a terrible waste of fish. But you are forgiven. Great story.
Okay, all right. Brother Matthew.
What I love about this story is that listening to this at home, there will be members of orchestras going, yeah, typical oboist.
Woodwind teachers,
do
don't you
get
hate
over
them?
it. Come on. Brass band, what do you expect? Brass.
Classic knuckle draggers.
Trombone, come on. So I love that. And also, you know, it was the 70s, different times, everyone. So getting fish and putting them on radiators, pretty common practice there. Unintended consequences, I would say. That's what this is all about. They didn't know he was going to be taking his mother-in-law to church the next day, and he wouldn't be using the car in between times. So, you know, them's the breaks. So I am definitely going to forgive.
You made my wife smell of fish, and I'm not putting up with that.